OverPower is back. The ultimate superpower battle simulator returns.
New to OverPower and want to figure out the rules? Welcome back to my How to Play series where we peel back the rules to OverPower like we would an onion. Hi, I'm the Traveling Goof. If you tuned in last time, we broke the OverPower card game down to its most basic elements: battling and counting venture. If you remember, after drawing 8 cards, you and your opponent will take turns playing offensive actions, defending them, and then passing the turn. At the end of the battle, once no more cards can be played, both players add up the value of the attacks which were successful that round. Whoever had the highest total wins the round. If you had additional questions, click here to refresh yourself with that How to Play video. That basic gameplay loop is enough to get you started, but there are more elements to OverPower which make it fun. Today we're going to talk about placing, duplicates, conceding, venturing, and the discard piles. These more intermediate topics will give you a much fuller understanding of the OverPower card game. Let's take a look. The first topic that we're going to be covering today is placing. This is a mechanic where you will keep cards between rounds and build up for some really explosive plays. This is going to come at the cost of showing your opponents some of what you have and limiting the use of your cards slightly. Each character has 3 open slots where you can place cards. There's a power card slot, a special card slot, and a universe card slot. We'll talk about the universe cards in another video, so let's instead focus on these other 2 slots. You don't get to mix and match which ones you play. You don't get to place 3 power cards, for example. You're going to have an opportunity to place cards each turn before the battle begins. Once you leave the placing phase of the turn, you won't be able to place them again, so make good decisions on which cards you think you want to keep. If you place a card on a character, it's going to stay between rounds. But the character has to be able to use it, so this Zeus card or this 7 energy would not be a viable placing option on Deja Taurus. If I were to place this 2 intelligence power card on Zeus, one of the restrictions is that only Zeus will now be able to play it. So if a small attack came in at Wicked Witch, I wouldn't be able to use this power card to block it. Instead, Zeus would be able to use it both to attack or defend, but no one else could. The same goes for special cards. Each character may place 1 special card usable by them in order to retain it between rounds. Again, this card is placed face up so both players can see what you put on the board. In general, any characters cannot be placed, unless, like Merlin's magic, it specifically states that placing is allowed. Like power cards, if you place one of these any characters onto a specific character, only that character will be able to use it. This means if you were to fully loaded characters, you'd be able to place a total of 12 cards onto your characters. The placing phase fits in after you draw, play events, and discard duplicates. Events won't be covered in this video, but duplication will. It was important to know about placing before we talked about that, so let's move into duplication now, and then we'll go into some examples. OverPower isn't like other games where you have a mana curve. Instead, you draw 8 cards and then have to play what's in your hand and what's placed to your team. One of the elements of variance is going to come in this duplication principle. Shortly after you draw your hand of 8 cards, you're going to check to make sure that your playable cards are not duplicates of each other. If they are, you'll have to pick and discard one of those duplicates. The best way to check for duplicates is by card type. Power cards are duplicates of each other if the value is the same, regardless of icon type. This means that this 4 combat power card is a duplicate of this 4 brute force power card, and I'd have to choose to discard one. Luckily, I don't have to discard both. However, if one of these was already placed to a character, I would be forced to discard the duplicate that is in my hand. If both these 4s were in your hand, you'd have to choose and discard one of them. However, if there's already a 4 that is placed to a character, you would be forced to discard the duplicates in your hand. In this case, both of these 4s would be duplicates that would have to be discarded, and the place card would stay in play. Special cards are duplicates of other special cards only if they have the same card name. You're not checking for their function. For example, Mob Mentality and Blackheath Rugby Star both have the same card text, but have different titles and would not be considered duplicates. However, these 2 Mob Mentalities would be a duplicate and you'd be forced to discard one. Remember that duplication is only between cards of the same type, so this 4 power card and this 4 special are not duplicates of each other, and you'd be able to keep both. Universe cards also have special duplication rules, but we're not talking about those this video. You'll also have to discard any unusable cards, which are cards that are no longer playable by your surviving team. This comes into play once a character has been knocked out. You may lose access to their specials or any power card or universe card, which is usable only by them. However, if there is a potential path for you to be able to use these cards, you're able to keep them in your hands. This comes into play in a number of niche circumstances. For example, if you're playing John Carter and Hercules gets knocked out, you wouldn't be able to use any of your 8 brute force power cards anymore. That is, unless you had John Carter's lower gravity, which can boost his brute force to 8. If you had that card, or the potential to draw it, then you wouldn't classify this 8 brute force as an unusable card, and you would be able to keep it in your hands. So let's review what we know so far. You'll start the round by drawing 8 cards. Then comes the event phase, but we're going to skip that in this video. Next, you'll have to discard duplicates. Once you've chosen your duplicates to discard, you'll show them to your opponents, and then place them in the discard pile. Then the player who has the initiative will start by placing 1 card if they so choose.
And then both players take turns placing until both have passed.
Once you've passed on placing, you can't change your mind and start placing again once you see what your opponent does. Then, if you're playing skirmish mode, you'd start the match. As you play out the battle, you can make your offensive actions either from your hand or from your war chest of placed cards. If you run out of playable cards in your hand, whether because you don't have any cards left or because all your cards left are defensive actions only, then you can pass. You're not forced to continue playing using your placed cards. But like placing, once you declare that you're passing, you can't change your mind once your opponent makes their move. You pass for the rest of the battle. But you have one other option besides passing, and that's conceding. Whenever it's your turn, you have the option to play your offensive action, pass if you have no further actions in your hand, or you can concede the round. Now let's talk about why you might choose this option. OverPower is a highly strategic card game. You're not only trying to win the battle, you're trying to win the war. If, for example, you drew a hand that had a lot of duplicates, and then you placed your cards, you might only have a couple cards left in hand while your opponent has many. In this case, you can concede the round and force both players to discard all cards in their hand. This will give you card advantage going into the next round at the cost of losing some mission cards in this one. You could also draw a hand that doesn't have a lot of venture while your opponent just placed a lot of big cards. You can guess that you're not going to be able to land any big hits to win the round, and will lose venture anyway, so rather than take all the damage from your opponent's big hits, you can concede to fight another day. One important thing to note is that you can't concede during your opponent's turn. So if they throw a big attack at you, you're unable to avoid it by conceding. You'll have to take the hits, and then concede on your next turn. If you play an action, your opponent has a chance to play their action before it becomes your turn again, and you have a chance to concede. This means that you have to weigh whether or not you want to throw your attack and try to defend your characters, or if you think it's time to concede right now. You also have the option to concede before the battle actually starts, which will occur after both players have placed and ventured. After both players have ventured, what does that mean? Well, here comes the culmination of all this strategic talk. We've talked about basic battle phases of offense and defensive actions. We've talked about duplication, we've talked about placing, and we've talked about conceding. In the skirmish mode, conceding doesn't cost you that much, but in regular overpower play, venture mode, your decisions have a much bigger impact. Instead of playing the best of 3, 5, or 7 missions, venture mode will give each player a full set of 7 mission cards which start in the reserve. You'll still have the same objective as before, landing more points of damage onto your opponent's character than they land onto yours so that you win the venture score and the battle. But after you draw, discard duplicates, and place, you'll instead choose how many of your mission cards you want to bet based off of how strong or weak you think your playable cards are. Let's say that both players choose to venture 2. You'll show this by rotating your mission cards 90 degrees. Let's say I decide to venture 2, and then my opponent also ventures 2. Both players will have the chance to concede before the battle starts, but if neither player takes that option, the battle will commence. The game will play out as normal, starting with the player who has initiative, which, remember, comes from either winning the coin toss at the start of the game, winning the previous battle, or having your opponent concede the previous battle. Both players will take turns making offensive actions and defending them. The battle goes on until both players pass, or one concedes. Let's say my opponent concedes after a couple hands. He got to play the attacks that he wanted, and now decides that it's too risky to stay in. His missions will move to his lost pile, while mine will move up into the completed pile. Hooray! In adventure mode, there are 3 different ways to win the game. Either you get all 7 of your missions into the completed pile. You lose if you got all 7 of your missions in the defeated pile. Or you can KO all of your opponent's characters. There's no longer a best of 3, 5, or 7 mechanic like in Skirmish. The most common path to victory is getting all your missions in the completed pile. Now, mission cards are a fluid thing. They're not stuck in completed, reserve, or defeated pile for the entire game. Instead, think of them more like a King of the Hill match. You'll be able to lose, regain, win, and lose these missions again. But if you happen to control all the hills at once, equivalent to completing all 7 aspects of your mission, then you win. Here's how this works. I'll simulate my missions with the Call of Cthulhu and my opponents with King of the Jungle. Now, in the previous example, both my opponent and I ventured 2. Now, he conceded, so my missions were moved to the completed pile, and his were moved down to the defeated missions pile. If we were to play another round, and let's say he ventured 1, where I venture 2, and then he wins, he's going to move up, and then mine will go down to the defeated pile. In order to recover a mission from the defeated pile, I will have to venture, in my next hand, a mission from the top. Let's say I ventured 2 from the top, and my opponent ventured 1, and then he loses. Well, his mission would just go from the completed down to the reserve, but these can't go up any higher. Instead, I now have 2 cards that I can move up from the defeated pile into the reserve. Alternatively, for having these 2, I can move 1 all the way up to the top. In general, it's a better idea to bet from the top if you can, because if you lose, you're still able to venture them the next round. Whereas if you ventured from the middle and then you're lost, you have fewer options for your next turn's venture. Because there's one final caveat to venturing. If you are to venture 2, there's no penalty. But for every mission beyond 2 that you bet, your opponent will be able to draw 1 card. So if I were to bet 4 in this case, my opponent would be able to draw 2 more cards. Now, if I was a first person venturing, my opponent would be able to draw those cards before determining what he wants to venture. Drawing those extra cards can also help limit the playing field, so betting big can be a risky move. However, your opponent will still have to discard any duplicates if they happen to draw any with those new cards. Boom! And that's what makes OverPower such a strategic and fun game, because you're not only thinking about the hand that you're playing, but your decisions are going to affect how the future ones go too. But let's say you and your opponent are evenly matched. No team is getting completely knocked out, and no one is able to get a 7-mission win or 7-mission loss. Will the game end when you draw your last card? Here's the great thing. No, it doesn't. This isn't like Magic where you can mill out your opponent. Instead, players are going to continue to play. So far, when we discarded duplicates, defended attacks, or discarded at the end of the battle, we haven't talked about the discard pile much at all. In OverPower, there's actually 3 different discard piles: the power pack, the dead pile, and the defeated characters pile. It seems weird, but this is key towards how play continues. You'll discard any lost power cards to the power pack. You'll discard all specials and universes to the dead pile, and then any knocked out characters or any character specials will go to the defeated characters pile. And so when you draw your final cards and your deck runs out, rather than having the game be over, you're going to shuffle your power pack and then place them face down back into your draw pile. This means that when a game runs on, it won't end. Instead, you'll be able to battle on with more power cards. Keep in mind that once the game gets to this point, some of your characters are likely to have been knocked out, so you may not be able to play all the cards in your power pack anymore. For example, keep in mind that once the game gets to this point, some of your characters are likely to have been knocked out, so you may not be able to play all the cards in your power pack anymore. If that's the case, during the discard duplicates phase, you'll discard any power cards unusable as well. These unusable cards will go to the defeated character pile, so you won't have to deal with them again if you have to reshuffle your power pack back in again. In OverPower, there's no maximum deck size because all decks will eventually get into the power pack if the game goes on long enough. Instead, the size of your deck will be an important consideration when building a deck. but that's a whole different topic worthy of its own video altogether. Whew. And that's the intermediate lesson on how to play Overpower. We started off by drawing 8 cards, slugging it out in attack and defense, and now we can strategically place our cards, discard duplicates and unplayable cards, and wager on how well we think our hand will do, or bluff to scare your opponent. We've also opened up new ways to win or lose with the Venture mode. And that covers the major mechanics of the game and elevates Overpower from checkers into chess. The final topics that we'll cover in the final video in this series are going to be utility cards, universe cards, event cards, location cards, any characters, and negating. Now that seems like a long list, but really these are only going to give you even more options of what you can do while you're playing. I hope this was a helpful step in your Overpower adventure. So grab some friends, get a couple decks, and venture well.